orphanage stood in silence, a cathedral of glass and cold light. Within its walls, children of translucent beauty slept in their fragile shells, hearts that did not beat, eyes that did not dream. Elara moved among them like a ghost of compassion, her reflection fractured in every polished surface. Yet in the stillness, something stirred, a faint glow beneath one child's ribs, pulsing softly, impossibly alive. It was a secret heartbeat, delicate and defiant, whispering of hope in a world built on control. As Elara reached toward that fragile light, she felt destiny fracture and begin to breathe. The carnival lights flickered faintly in the distance, stubbornly clinging to the night like a dying ember refusing to be extinguished. I stood on the edges of town, the cold morning air biting through my thin jacket, my breath a visible ghost dissolving into the chill. The grotesque glow of the carnival stretched out before me, an unyielding, unnatural presence that no sunrise could fully erase. I wanted to believe I was free. I had run from the labyrinth of twisted mirrors, the laughter that gnawed at my bones, the hunger that devoured hope itself. But standing there, with the first pale light brushing the cracked pavement, I felt the weight of the carnival's shadow still pressing down on my chest. The town was quiet, but not peaceful. It carried the residue of the carnival's unending feast. The missing faces, the whispered rumors, the fading smiles of those who had once wandered into its grasp. My own reflection caught in a darkened window, fractured and uncertain, mirrored the fractured pieces of my soul. I traced a finger along the cold glass, feeling the subtle tremor beneath my skin, the echo of something ancient and insatiable lurking just beyond the veil of reality. Back in my room, the carnival posters on the wall seemed to warp and shift when I wasn't looking. The colors bled, the clown's smiles twisted into grimaces of despair. I sat on the edge of my bed, my eyes locked on the cracked mirror beside the dresser. My face stared back at me, pale and gaunt, eyes wide but wary. The nightmare had marked me, not just on my skin but deep inside, where the carnival's hunger still gnawed. I remembered Mara's warning, the way her eyes held both resignation and fierce determination. I saw her face in flickering carnival mirrors, always just out of reach, her voice a whisper carried on the wind. Beware the hunger that never sleeps. The carnival was not gone, it never truly left. It lingered in the shadows of the town, in the silence between heartbeats, in the laughter that echoed faintly at the edge of hearing. Mr. Grin's wide, unnerving smile haunted the corners of my vision, and the twins stood silent sentinels in the fog, their painted faces frozen in sinister grins. I wanted to scream, to warn the others, but the words caught in my throat. My mother didn't believe me. The townsfolk went about their days, eyes glazed with complacency or fear. The carnival's hunger was a cycle, a never-ending feast that fed on innocence, on hope, on the very souls of those drawn into its spectacle. And I was left standing beneath the carnival lights, caught between relief and terror, between escape and entrapment. The nightmare was not over. It was only beginning anew. As dusk began to fall once more, the carnival's lights sputtered to life, flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. The music swelled, distant and haunting, and I could feel the hunger stirring again, a living pulse beneath the carnival's gleaming surface, waiting for the next soul to be lured into its grasp. I turned away, but the laughter followed me, echoing through the night, a reminder that beneath the carnival lights, some horrors never fade. They wait, and they hunger. Elara moved silently through the sterile halls of the orphanage, her footsteps muffled by the thick, seamless flooring that reflected the harsh overhead lights like a fractured mirror. The air was cool, sterile, almost antiseptic in its precision, and the faint hum of machinery pulsed through the walls, a constant reminder of the clinical nature of this place. Yet amid this cold efficiency, a fragile beauty lingered, one that Elara found herself drawn to with a mixture of reverence and unease. In the center of the ward, Lumen sat quietly on a smooth, white bench, the faint glow beneath the child's translucent ribs pulsing softly with a steady heartbeat. Elara's sharp eyes, reflective and keen, studied the subtle rise and fall of Lumen's fragile chest. The child's glass body shimmered faintly under the artificial light, each delicate curve and contour catching and bending the beams, casting fractured rainbows across the polished floors. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered just above Lumen's cool surface. Unlike the other glass children, whose stillness often bordered on statuesque, Lumen radiated a quiet vitality that was impossible to ignore. Elara's heart clenched at the uniqueness of this fragile being, part artificial, part achingly real, whose existence challenged everything she thought she knew. As she withdrew her hand, Elara's mind drifted back to her former life, one shadowed by ethical conflicts and agonizing decisions. She had been a scientist once, a creator of artificial life, but the sterile laboratories and clinical detachment had weighed heavily on her conscience. The project she had helped develop was meant to push the boundaries of science, to redefine what life could be, but at what cost. Her departure had been abrupt, driven by a gnawing sense of guilt and a refusal to become complicit in what she increasingly saw as an exploitation of innocence. Yet here she was, drawn back into the heart of the orphanage, now as a caretaker rather than a scientist, standing guard over these fragile beings crafted from glass and light. The other children moved with an eerie grace, their translucent forms shimmering and shifting in the dim corridors. They seemed to exist in a world apart, caught between reality and illusion. Their behaviors were enigmatic, sometimes playful, sometimes distant, as if they were echoes of something lost or not yet understood. Elara watched as one child caught a beam of light, fracturing it into a cascade of dancing prisms that flickered across the walls like ghostly whispers. She felt a pang of sorrow and hope entwined, a recognition of innocence at risk, and a desperate yearning to shield it. The motif of reflection haunted her thoughts. The glass was not just a physical barrier, but a metaphor for identity, vulnerability, and the fragile line between artifice and life. In the stillness of the ward, Elara found herself gazing into a pane of glass, catching her own reflection fractured and multiplied. 1,000 Elaras staring back with mirrored eyes filled with doubt and determination. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of her small office, Elara confided in Myra, her assistant and confidant. Myra's soft features and warm presence were a balm against the coldness of the orphanage. They spoke in hushed tones, the distant drone of the orphanage's machinery underscoring their conversation. "Lumen is different," Elara whispered, voice barely audible. "There's something real beneath the glass, a heartbeat." "A life," Myra nodded, her eyes reflecting concern and empathy. "We have to be careful. The others don't understand, but I believe you." Their alliance was fragile, but Elara moved silently through the sterile halls of the orphanage, her footsteps muffled by the thick, seamless flooring that reflected the harsh overhead lights like a fractured mirror. The air was cool, sterile, almost antiseptic in its precision, and the faint hum of machinery pulsed through the walls, a constant reminder of the clinical nature of this place. Yet amid this cold efficiency, a fragile beauty lingered, one that Elara found herself drawn to with a mixture of reverence and unease. In the center of the ward, Lumen sat quietly on a smooth, white bench, the faint glow beneath the child's translucent ribs pulsing softly with a steady heartbeat. Elara's sharp eyes, reflective and keen, studied the subtle rise and fall of Lumen's fragile chest. The child's glass body shimmered faintly under the artificial light, each delicate curve and contour catching and bending the beams, casting fractured rainbows across the polished floors. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered just above Lumen's cool surface. Unlike the other glass children, whose stillness often bordered on statuesque, Lumen radiated a quiet vitality that was. Elara moved quietly through the cold corridors of the orphanage, the soft echo of her footsteps swallowed by the sterile white walls that stretched endlessly around her. The light overhead flickered faintly, casting fractured reflections in the smooth glass surfaces that lined the halls. Each pane was not merely a window, but a silent witness to the fragile lives contained within. The glass children, with their translucent limbs and delicate forms, moved with an eerie grace, their faint pulses of light flickering like fragile stars in a dark sky. She paused outside the common room, watching as the children shifted subtly, their glass bodies whispering secrets in shimmering patterns. There was something different tonight, something unspoken yet palpable in the air. Elara's sharp eyes caught the faintest quiver in Lumen's form as the child reached out, fingers trembling, to touch another child. The reflections danced between them, light bending and breaking in ways that stirred a strange mixture of awe and dread in her heart. Later, in the dim sanctuary of the caretaker's break room, Elara sat across from Myra. The room was cloaked in shadows, the harsh brightness of the orphanage replaced by a muted warmth. Myra's presence was a balm, her soft features etched with concern as Elara spoke in hushed tones. "There's more to this place than they told us," Elara confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen things, behaviors, patterns that don't fit with the original designs. The children, they're changing." Myra reached out, placing a steady hand over Elara's trembling fingers. "We'll face it together," she said firmly. "But we must be careful. They're watching, and Director Voss's reach is long." The weight of those words settled heavily on Elara's shoulders. Outside the room, the orphanage continued its cold rhythm, but beneath the surface, a storm was gathering. Meanwhile, Jack slipped through shadowed corridors, his movements swift and silent. His eyes darted nervously as he approached the security hub, fingers already working the controls with practiced ease. The sterile hum of machinery was a constant reminder of the walls closing in around them. He downloaded encrypted files, exposing the sinister underpinnings of the Glass Children project, files that, if revealed, could unravel the carefully constructed facade of control. But with each risk he took, the danger grew. Security protocols tightened, and the presence of Director Voss's agents loomed ever nearer. Jax knew the stakes. Failure meant not only his own end, but the destruction of the fragile lives he had come to cherish. Back in the children's quarters, the Glass Children's surreal behaviors escalated. Their bodies flickered with shifting light, casting kaleidoscopic patterns over the walls. Their movements were fluid, almost alien, like whispers of a secret language spoken through the gleam of shattered reflections. Elara watched, heart clenched, as innocence and vulnerability seemed to merge with something otherworldly. Her protective instincts flared. The orphanage, once a place of quiet care, was becoming a battleground of shadows and secrets. And at its heart lay the fragile truth that could shatter everything. As the day waned, Elara found herself at the observation window, gazing out at the sterile landscape beyond. The cold light fractured across her face, her reflection intertwining with the fragile outlines of the Glass Children behind her. In that fractured reflection, she saw herself anew, a guardian caught between hope and despair, strength and vulnerability. The whispers in the glass were growing louder, and Elara knew the fragile silence could break at any moment. She pressed her palm against the cool surface of the window, feeling the faint tremor beneath, a silent promise that she would not let the children shatter. Not while she still breathed. Outside, the first shadows of night crept toward the orphanage, carrying with them the threat of revelation and ruin. Inside, fragile hearts beat quietly, waiting for a protector to rise. And Elara was ready to answer the call. The fragile sanctuary was no longer safe. The battle for innocence had begun. The Glass Children shimmered in the fading light, their whispers growing into a chorus of fragile defiance. And as the shadows lengthened, Elara steeled herself for the storm to come, knowing that every choice, every whispered secret could change everything. The nursery was hushed, bathed in the pale, clinical light that filtered through the high, frost-coated windows. Rows of Glass Children lay in their translucent cradles, their delicate forms glowing faintly in the sterile environment. Elara moved softly through the room, her footsteps muffled by the thick mats placed carefully beneath her feet to prevent any accidental disturbance. Her sharp eyes, reflective like shards of glass themselves, scanned the fragile figures with a mixture of reverence and unease. Her gaze settled on Lumen, the child who had come to occupy more than just a corner of her mind. Unlike the others, who seemed little more than exquisite sculptures, Lumen bore a faint, pulsing glow beneath the ribs, an erratic heartbeat that whispered of something profoundly alive. Elara knelt beside the cradle, her breath held as the child's slender fingers twitched, reaching outward in slow, tentative movements. The glass fingers caught the sterile light, fracturing it into a kaleidoscope of shimmering reflections that danced along the white walls. "You're different," Elara whispered, voice barely audible over the soft hum of the orphanage's life support systems. "Not just fragile, alive." Lumen's eyes, deep pools of translucent blue, met hers briefly, a flicker of curiosity sparking within. The silent communication between them was electric, a fragile thread weaving connection through the cold space. Elara's heart clenched with a bittersweet ache. She had cared for many glass children before, but none had stirred such fierce protectiveness. The child was a paradox, so vulnerable, yet pulsing with an undeniable vitality. She rose slowly, the weight of responsibility pressing down like the sterile air around her. Outside the nursery, the orphanage's corridors gleamed with cold efficiency, the spotless surfaces reflecting every echo and shadow. Elara's reflection caught her own sharp eyes, mirrors to the fractured pieces of her soul. For so long, she had maintained a careful distance, a shield forged from her past as a scientist embroiled in ethical conflicts that had driven her from the project. But now that shield felt brittle, cracking under the force of her growing empathy. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. Myra stepped inside, her presence warm and steady like a hearth in the cold place. Her soft features and worn clothing contrasted with the clinical surroundings, a reminder of the humanity Elara clung to. "How is she?" Myra asked quietly, nodding toward Lumen's cradle. Elara hesitated, then nodded. "More alive than the others, it's unsettling and wonderful all at once." Myra approached, her eyes gentle but concerned. "You're letting yourself care, Elara. That's dangerous here." A shadow passed over Elara's face. "I know. But how can I not? She's not just glass, she's a heart beating beneath it all." Their conversation was cut short by the distant, sharp clatter of footsteps echoing down the hallway. Elara's gaze snapped to the door's reflective glass pane, catching the faint silhouette of an austere figure framed against the stark light, the unmistakable presence of Director Voss. Voss's cold eyes swept the corridor, calculating and merciless. Behind him, security lead Royce and several agents followed, their movements precise and threatening. Their steps resonated like a ticking clock, a reminder that time and control were closing in. Elara's chest tightened. The director's obsession with power and control had become an oppressive force within the orphanage's walls. His agents' increasing presence was a suffocating shadow that threatened to crush the fragile sanctuary she had tried so hard to protect. Later, in the caretaker's quarters, Elara sat alone. The room was dim, shadows pooling in the corners like spilled ink. Her eyes, reflective and sharp, caught shards of the glass children's shapes flickering through the window, a distorted reflection of herself and the fragile lives she guarded. She felt the weight of isolation pressing down, the loneliness that had shaped her for years. Yet beneath that, a stirring, a tentative embrace of vulnerability. Lumen had cracked open something within her, a longing to connect, to protect not just the fragile vessels, but the living pulse beneath. Myra's voice broke through the silence when she returned with a tray of simple food. "You can't fight this alone," she said softly. "We need each other now more than ever." Elara nodded, swallowing the lump of fear in her throat. "I know. But the fragility of it all, it scares me." "Fragility is not weakness," Myra replied, her eyes steady. "It's the space where strength can grow." Outside, the orphanage's mechanical heartbeat thrummed steadily, but within its walls, the fragile balance between hope and dread had begun to tilt. Elara's bond with Lumen deepened, a beacon in the encroaching shadows. Yet, as Director Voss's grip tightened, the fragile sanctuary threatened to shatter. At night, when the children's soft breathing and the occasional faint pulse from Lumen's glowing heart filled the air, Elara found herself drawn back to the nursery. She stood silently, watching the glass children shimmer in the dim light, their beauty and vulnerability entwined like threads of a delicate tapestry. Her fingers hovered over Lumen's cradle, trembling slightly before resting gently on the smooth surface. "I will protect you," she vowed, voice barely more than a breath, "no matter what it takes." But even as she made that promise, the cold eyes of Director Voss watched from the shadows beyond the glass panes, his intentions as unyielding as the fragile walls that enclosed them all. The orphanage was no longer just a place of care. It was a battleground where fragility and power collided, where the heart beneath the glass could ignite a revolution or be crushed beneath the weight of control. And Elara stood at the center, torn between the shards of her past and the fragile hope she now carried. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting long reflections through the windows, the fragile children slept on, unaware of the storm gathering around them. Elara's resolve hardened like tempered glass, ready to face the shadows and protect the fragile light flickering within Lumen's chest. The fragile balance held for now. Elara sat in the dim corner of the nursery, her fingers tracing the smooth, cool surface of a glass child's arm. The translucent figure sat motionless, its faintly glowing veins pulsing beneath a fragile shell. The air hummed softly with the sterile chill that permeated every room of the orphanage, a place where light seemed to fracture endlessly, bouncing off glass and steel with dispassionate clarity. Outside the window, the cold sky pressed against the horizon, a silent reminder of the world beyond these walls. The stillness was broken by a quiet knock at the heavy steel door. Elara's sharp eyes flicked toward the sound, and she rose carefully, mindful not to startle the children who seemed to shimmer with faint reflections of her movement. Myra stepped in, her warm presence a balm against the clinical austerity of the space. "Jax is here," Myra whispered, glancing nervously toward the corridor. Elara nodded, her heart tightening. The technician's rebellious spirit had become an unexpected ally in this place of fragile secrets. The door opened just enough to reveal Jax's disheveled figure, quick eyes scanning before settling on Elara. "I don't have much time," Jax said hurriedly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. He pulled a small data chip from his pocket, pressing it into Elara's hand with trembling fingers. "This is what they're really planning. The corporation, they don't see these children as anything but assets, perfect vessels for control." Elara's breath caught. The cold dread she'd tried to suppress now roared beneath her skin. "How deep does it go?" Jax's eyes darkened. "Beyond anything you could imagine. They want to weaponize the glass children, use them in ways that, it's monstrous. Lumen is the key to it all. Lumen. The child with the real beating heart beneath the fragile exterior. The anomaly that had become Elara's secret, her burden." Myra moved closer, placing a comforting hand on Elara's shoulder. "We have to be careful. The children are more vulnerable than ever." Elara's gaze drifted toward the nursery's center, where the glass children sat in silent clusters. Their forms caught the weak light and fractured it into dancing patterns on the walls. Yet something was different. Their movements were less mechanical now, more fluid, almost alive in a way that unsettled the sterile order of the orphanage. A soft murmur rippled through the room, a sound like whispered secrets or distant echoes. The children's eyes, crystalline and unblinking, flickered with strange vitality. One reached out, delicate fingers tracing patterns on a pane of glass, scattering light into shimmering shards that played across the ceiling. "They're changing," Elara whispered, "not just physically, but something deeper." Myra nodded, her expression grave. "The more they sense the danger, the more their innocence is threatened." A sudden alarm shattered the fragile calm. The piercing sound echoed through the sterile halls, reverberating against polished steel and glass. The children froze, their bodies trembling with an eerie iridescence that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their hidden fears. Elara's heart pounded. "We need to prepare." In the shadows beyond the nursery, the sterile walls seemed to close in, the light fracturing into endless reflections. Elara caught her own image in a nearby pane, tall, pale, her sharp eyes mirroring the fragile forms she vowed to protect. The weight of the revelation pressed down, a fracture in the silence that had held the orphanage captive. "This place," she murmured, "is no longer safe." Jax's voice was low but resolute. "We fight or we lose everything." Elara inhaled deeply, the cold air filling her lungs. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by danger and despair. Yet within the fragile hearts beating beneath glass, she found a spark of desperate hope, a fragile light in the encroaching darkness. And she would guard it with everything she had. Outside the nursery, the orphanage's corridors stretched endlessly, sterile and unyielding. Yet beneath the surface, fractures had begun to form, not just in glass, but in trust, in silence, and in the fragile bonds that held this place together. Elara knew the coming days would test every ounce of her courage and compassion. The quiet rebellion of the children, the whispered secrets shared in shadowed halls, and the looming threat of those who sought to exploit innocence all converged in a delicate dance. The orphanage was a cage, but in its heart, a fragile resistance flickered to life, one that might shatter the cold order forever. Elara stood at the threshold of this new reality, her reflections fractured yet clear. The children depended on her. Lumen, with the beating heart hidden beneath translucent ribs, was the key to everything. She would protect them, even if it meant breaking the silence, even if it meant shattering the fragile peace they clung to. Because sometimes, the greatest strength was born in the fractures of silence. The alarm continued to echo faintly, a reminder that the true battle had only just begun. As night deepened, the glass children gathered in their spaces, their fragile forms catching the dim light in mesmerizing patterns. Elara and Myra moved among them quietly, their hands gentle, their voices soft. The surreal behavior of the children, the way they seemed to reflect and refract light, almost communicating in silence, was both beautiful and terrifying. Elara's mind raced with the information Jax had provided. She pieced together the corporate plans, the exploitation, the cold strategies that viewed these children not as beings but as commodities. Her own past as a scientist haunted her. Had she unknowingly helped birth this nightmare? The ethical conflicts, once distant and theoretical, now pressed against her soul like shards of broken glass. Myra, ever the nurturer, whispered reassurances. "We will keep them safe." Together, Elara's eyes glistened, mirroring the fragile forms around her. Yes, together. But outside, in the shadows beyond the orphanage, the forces of control were tightening their grip. And the fractures in silence were beginning to widen into cracks that threatened to consume them all. The fragile balance between innocence and exploitation, between hope and despair, trembled on the edge of breaking. And Elara knew there would be no turning back now.